Hi, everybody. Briana Whitney here, host of True Crime AZ Live. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got a stacked show with a bunch of different cases from around the country, but this is a little bit of a different show because this first segment we are focusing on an execution that is happening here in Arizona tomorrow morning. I have covered executions before, but this is unique because I am now going to be a media witness, meaning I am going to watch this inmate die, which I have never done before. We want to tell you about this case and about Richard Djerf, the suspect. It's the first segment tonight, The Big Case. All right, this is Richard Djerf, who is being put to death in Arizona tomorrow morning. This is for the 1993 murders of the Luna family. It is a heinous crime that has rocked this community for years, so much so that people were even messaging me about it today on social media, talking about how they don't forget these victims of the Luna family, one of them being a teenager, another being a 5-year-old boy, and how they want this chapter to come to an end, this storybook of Richard Djerf and what he did. This is an important story because our Arizona's Family news anchor, Scott Passmore, interviewed Richard Djerf in jail 30 years ago. And I really dug into our archives and our tape files to learn more about what that interview was like, what the actual crime was like back in 1993, and where we are now. I have been messaging with Richard Djerf now for a couple weeks, and he messaged me all the way up until today. I'm going to read you that after we take you through this story, but I wanted to kind of dive deep into the case here so you get to know the Luna family, who they were, what the crime was, and then see Richard Djerf in jail 30 years ago compared to what he's saying now. So take a listen and take a watch to this story that explains the entire case from 1993 until today, 2025.
I got a letter sent to me personally, and I remember seeing Richard Djerf on the outside of it.
It's 1995. The brazen killer just convicted. A young Arizona's Family anchor, Scott Passmore, gets invited by Djerf himself to do a jailhouse interview about the day he killed the Luna family. Passmore had no idea what was about to happen when he sat down with Djerf face to face.
I had the father restrained. He broke loose and came charging me and stabbed me, and then I pulled my gun and just started shooting.
So that made you even more angry?
No? Well, I don't know what happened. I was just like, I got taken over to a new level or something like that.
I just remember him just talking about everything that he had done, and it was just like it was no big deal. It was so matter of fact and nonchalant.
The reason I went over there, it was I was basically daring myself to see how far I could go before I turned back and before I basically chickened out. But it was like I lost control and I didn't chicken out.
I've never gotten a letter from somebody saying, hey, come down, I want to talk about this crime I did.
Why do you think he wrote it to you?
I have no idea.
What Djerf had done was unthinkable.
Oh my God. He said his mom's face is all kicked up and he can hear gas, smell gas, and his little brother's laying on the table.
He had used a ruse to get into the West Phoenix home of the Luna family with a plan to kill them all to get back at his Safeway co-worker Albert Luna Jr., who Djerf believed had stolen something from his home. Djerf raped and killed Albert's teen sister, killed his 5-year-old brother, and both parents, knowing his co-worker would eventually find his family dead.
Thinking about it after it happened, it was like watching a film or a movie or something like that. That's the only way I can really describe it.
How so?
Huh?
How so? How was it like a film?
It was just like I was watching myself do it.
The prosecutor on the case called it the worst crime scene he's ever seen, as details started to pour in about Djerf and his obsession with violent films and disturbing home decor.
There was like this mummy type of skeleton figurine, about 5 foot, like a female type of thing hanging on a noose from his bedroom.
After conviction, Djerf knew his likely next stop was death row.
What if he says the death penalty?
I expect death penalty. That way, if I do get it, I won't be devastated.
After 3 decades to reflect, Djerf didn't want to do a final on-camera interview, but has been messaging me ahead of his execution. He said at the time he became obsessed with blaming his co-worker Albert, and that spun out of control. He says Albert was always innocent, and that he is truly sorry for the pain he has caused and the lives he took, hoping his own death brings a measure of peace decades later.
If you're part of that family that had to suffer through that, and to think to suffer for 30 years before you get the outcome that you probably wanted as well, that's a long time.
But let's just talk about what I think this is going to be like tomorrow as somebody witnessing this. It is odd to be messaging with the killer, knowing he's going to die tomorrow. It's an odd situation, and we don't usually get access like this. I've been a part, at least, of several executions, and usually the inmate does not talk to us a lot. We did want to do a jailhouse interview with Djerf. He said no, but he has been very vocal over messaging, which is just typically access we don't have. But this is interesting. I want to read you guys the very last message he sent to me today. I asked him if he had any final thoughts, emotions, feelings, and how his week in Florence had been, because where the prison is here in Arizona, it's about an hour and a half outside Phoenix, and very desolate, of course, where prisons typically are. That's where the executions happen. But actual death row in Arizona has now been moved to Tucson. So the inmates have to be transferred or transported up here to the Phoenix area, to Florence, for about a week, and then they have to be on homicide and suicide watch to make sure that they don't try to take their own lives before their actual execution, which I thought was interesting. So I asked him, how has it been? Do you have any final words? This is what he messaged me today, this afternoon, his final message to me before he'll be put to death tomorrow. Quote, I've done my best to make amends and I'm at peace with this. When this is over, I hope the focus will change from what horrible things I did to the Luna family to something more positive about who they were. Damien, Rochelle, Patricia, Albert, those are the names that should be remembered, not mine. Thought that was interesting. We don't know if other members of the Luna family will be at the execution tomorrow. I have reached out and I'm not sure yet if they're going to be coming. So that will be interesting because sometimes family will come to these executions after so many decades of waiting for justice for their loved ones. So they would speak tomorrow potentially if they come. Other people I expect to be there. Sometimes you have the attorney general who shows up. Sometimes you have the Maricopa County attorney who also becomes part of this. And so I will probably be with them in the execution room, and just to kind of let you know how this goes from a standpoint of what I know to be true. I'll be taken into a room. Richard Djerf will be on this kind of like gurney type deal behind a glass window. There will be curtains over it, and almost like a puppet show, the curtains will open, and then that's when we'll start to see the doctors who are in there and the nurses giving him the IV, which typically the hardest thing to find, can be getting that IV actually in. We have had some botched lethal injections in Arizona in years past, but we are hopeful that this time this one will go just fine. The past couple have, and if all goes as well, he should basically just go to sleep and then pass away. So this will be interesting to see how this goes. We're going to have a live stream on AZ Family tomorrow. I will be part of the press conference with the people who witnessed this, prosecutors likely as well, and then prison staff as well. So stay with us, AZ Family. He should be being executed tomorrow at 10 a.m. Maybe an hour or two after that is when the press conference will happen, depending on how long this all takes. And so it should be interesting. We'll have live reports as well from tomorrow morning at the prison, and then, of course, the reaction after. Alexis Dominguez, who's been on the show before as a reporter, will be covering it, interviewing me, and then dealing with all the other sound that will be coming from those who are part of it as well, and have that on our 4, 5, and 6 p.m. newscast here in Arizona tomorrow. So stay tuned. Definitely interesting. My first execution I'll witness. Honestly, wouldn't mind it being the last either. It's such a weird situation, but I do think as somebody who covers true crime, I should know from start to finish how the death penalty and execution process works. So I do think this is important for my career to be able to give you guys more knowledge, analysis, and background when we're dealing with death penalty cases, which in my profession is all the time. So Next segment, we are talking about the Mark Sanchez investigation. So many people have been talking about this online. We have a live interview standing by, waiting to give us some analysis. Criminal defense attorney who I've worked with for years. We'll see you guys on the other side of the break. All right, welcome back to segment 2 tonight, the expert breakdown. This mugshot next to me, Fox Sports analyst Mark Sanchez. I know a lot of people have been following this bizarre case out of Indianapolis now for a couple weeks. Mark Sanchez stabbed right before he was going to be doing analysis for an NFL game while in Indiana. And at first, nobody really knew what was going on, worried that he actually was the victim in this case. But as the police started investigating and more details came forward, we learned that Mark was actually the aggressor, according to police, and that he attacked a delivery driver who was just trying to make a delivery to a loading dock in the early morning hours, the nighttime hours, to a Westin hotel. So I want to show you some of the surveillance footage from this, kind of take you through the details of this case. This is from TMZ Sports. You can see here, that's Mark Sanchez walking on your screen by that dumpster, and this alley is where this alleged fight goes down. So here's what we know. The surveillance footage was obtained by TMZ. According to the police report, the victim is Perry Toll, who was driving a delivery truck into that back alley to make a delivery at the loading dock for the Westin. According to the police report, Mark Sanchez randomly told Perry Toll that he and his truck could not be at that loading dock. Toll was very confused because that's where he was supposed to be. Mark was kind of aimlessly walking around like you can see here in this video. And so Toll was trying to figure out what was going on. He was trying to ask for a manager to figure out like what was Mark talking about. And at one point actually thought that Mark Sanchez was the manager because of how clean cut he was. According to the police report, Sanchez ended up running after Toll, was attacking him, threw him against a wall. Toll tried to get into his truck, knew that this was escalating to what could be a life-threatening incident. At that point, Mark Sanchez allegedly blocked Toll from getting in his own truck. Toll feared for his life, grabbed pepper spray. It worked temporarily, but Sanchez was still coming after him. So that's when Toll told police that he grabbed a knife and reportedly stabbed Mark Sanchez in self-defense. Now, we're still watching parts of this surveillance footage here, and eventually it should show Mark Sanchez kind of running back. Okay, so here you see him running. That was allegedly right after this fight took place, which has to come from a different angle. You can see him kind of doubled over there, and then there's going to be a shot here you're going to see on the front end where you can actually see Mark Sanchez with what looks to be blood on his shirt. It's not that shot, but it should come up here in just a minute. He's actually running after getting stabbed. And then that's when you kind of see what looks to be a very bloody shirt. Okay, so there he is running. Let's see if we can kind of show you that moment. Goes down the other way. And it's weird. Nobody knows why he was in this area. Here he is fleeing the scene, and then you're going to see him here turn the corner, and that's when you can really see what's on his shirt. He'll kind of double over, and when he gets close to the camera here, you're going to see it. So he then ran into a nearby bar, and that's where they called 911. There's the shirt. You can see clearly what's on it right there, and that's blood from getting stabbed by Perry Toll. Now, here's what's interesting. According to the police report, Toll told detectives exactly what I just was telling you and relaying about Sanchez being the aggressor, all of these things. Well, apparently there's video that exists outside of just that surveillance footage that matches up nearly identically to what Perry told police. When they interviewed Mark Sanchez about the incident, Sanchez said he couldn't remember anything at all except for grabbing a window. That was it. So clearly there was an intoxication problem here, but this was an extremely detrimental attack to both men. They both ended up in the hospital severely hurt. Mark Sanchez was in critical condition in the hospital for over a week. Now, they've both been released, and Mark Sanchez was intercepted by media who was at the hospital in Indianapolis to try to ask him questions as he was leaving. When he was leaving the hospital, he was heading to the courthouse where he was going to have to be processed and booked for a felony and multiple misdemeanor charges in this case. That's where this mugshot came from, but then he was later released. I want to play the sound from when Mark Sanchez is getting out of the hospital. He's questioned by reporters, and this is what he has to say.
Mark, is there anything you want to say to the people of Indianapolis?
Just right now I'm just focus on my recovery, and I just wanted to thank the first responders, Eskenazi Hospital. I'm sorry, you're going to hit some. Marion County Sheriff and the Indianapolis Police Department, Metro PD. But I'm focused on my recovery, and I want to see my wife. I want to see my son, my 2 baby girls. There'll be a day to answer all these questions, and unfortunately today's not that day.
Anything you want to say to
But
Mr. Toll?
I guess the real thing here is I just want to thank Dr. Mossler, the surgeon. She saved my life, so I'm grateful for that. Sorry, I can't answer all your questions.
Feeling any better?
Thank you, guys.
Recovering slowly now.
Okay, interesting. So we're thanking the surgeons, we're thanking the doctors, we're thanking the first responders, but didn't have anything to say to Perry Toll, obviously not trying to compromise his case. I think people still have a lot of questions. We also don't know what Fox Sports is doing. We know that Perry Toll is suing Mark Sanchez and the Fox Sports Corporation, but we don't know really what's going to come of the civil versus the criminal. So I want to bring in our live interview tonight, Russ Richelsoff, a criminal defense attorney here in Arizona. Russ, thank you so much for joining us. You and I have worked together for so many years, but it's your first time on True Crime AZ Live.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, we love it. Okay, so this is such an odd case. I think people have a lot of questions. There's video involved. We've got this, high-profile person who people thought was the victim. Now he may be the suspect, the aggressor in this fight. We got a felony, misdemeanor charges, and people are still kind of at odds of what actually happened and took place in this alley and why it happened at all. From a surveillance footage perspective, obviously we could see what TMZ Sports was showing there. That's only one angle, though, or a couple cameras. You and I both read the probable cause, the police report. It seems like there's a lot more surveillance footage that is in this case that we haven't seen. Does that seem correct to you, too?
Yeah, it's, nowadays there's so much surveillance footage being taken all the time everywhere that we've kind of come to the point where juries expect it. And in fact, if there isn't surveillance footage, the juries are asking, why isn't there any surveillance footage? So yeah, I suspect there's a lot more surveillance footage. We also know that the cell phones were seized, and it appears that the 2 individuals were, video recording each other while the incident was taking place. So that video will also be used in the criminal case by the prosecutor's office.
What do you make of that probable cause document? And just to explain to viewers, probable cause basically is how detectives explain why somebody should face the charges that they are. It's kind of the narrative of what happened according to the police. In that, I thought it was pretty detailed, but I did think it was interesting that Mark Sanchez can't seem to remember anything at all from this attack. Was there anything that stood out to you specifically with the case when you were reading that narrative?
So, you mentioned Mark Sanchez says he can't remember. He had a very difficult time remembering anything. That's going to hurt him later because if he were to want to testify in court at trial, and all of a sudden, he remembers something that he couldn't remember immediately after it happened, that's going to be very suspicious. So even just the fact that he said he can't remember what happened is going to hurt him and limit his ability to testify in court.
So he shouldn't have said that.
He shouldn't have said anything. He probably didn't know that he was being investigated by the police, but this is a situation where anytime somebody is being questioned by the police, they really should talk to an attorney first to see if they should even make any statement at all, even if the statement is I don't remember what happened.
Right. Interesting here that he's facing a felony, 3 misdemeanors. Is that odd that he's facing a felony in this case? Could it be escalated because it was an alleged attack? I mean, can you explain that from a legal perspective?
So, yeah, another thing that I found interesting when I read the, probable cause statement, and I knew that initially he was going to be charged with 3 misdemeanors, and then when we look at the actual charging document, there's 4 crimes there, and the 4th crime is a felony. He's charged with basically a felony battery. It's battery for serious physical injury. What's interesting, though, is that in Indiana, uh, extreme pain falls under the category of serious physical injury. That's kind of interesting because, for example, a broken bone, which would be also considered a serious physical injury, that's something, you can have a doctor take the stand. The doctor can show an x-ray and point and say, hey, here's the broken bone. Extreme pain, the level of pain that somebody experienced from an injury is very subjective. So that's something that is really going to be open to interpretation by a jury. A jury's going to, if this goes to a jury trial, jury's going to have to decide, did this person really experience extreme pain based off of their injury? And it's not something that's black and or white, like an x-ray.
Right.
It's something that's quite gray, and subjective.
And just to be clear, we don't have that threshold here in Arizona.
No, so in Arizona, serious physical injury would be kind of a more common sense definition of serious physical injury. Usually it involves broken bones or an injury that required medical care or was extreme medical care like a surgery or was life-threatening.
Interesting. Okay. So do you expect, given his high profile nature and what appears to be the situation at hand, that he would plead this down and not take this to trial?
At this point in time, that's difficult to say. There's going to be probably his defense team is going to take a couple of different strategies. One, they're going to try to poke holes in the state's case. Again, the fact that the state is relying on extreme pain to make this a felony versus a misdemeanor, it's a little weak. Usually prosecutors want stronger evidence. But then the other tact that his legal team I expect to take will be what I refer to as a mitigation tact. And when we talk about mitigation, what we're talking about is not making an excuse or minimizing what happened, but demonstrating to the prosecutor and demonstrating to the court that actions have been taken by the defendant in order to address the problem that led to this. So in this situation, what we have here is we have a man who, at least from the video and the descriptions of his actions, appears to be very intoxicated.
Yeah.
I expect Mark Sanchez will be checking into some type of detox and rehab facility, and that he will be undergoing, I suspect, inpatient treatment. That kind of thing, it's twofold. One, it helps the legal case, but for my clients, when they do have substance abuse issues, I always tell them, look, this is going to help your legal case, but do this for yourself. This is going to help you. This is going to make your life better in the long run if you can get this problem dealt with.
Yeah. One more question for you. With all of this and all of this playing out, the mother of his son had posted on social media, mostly asking for privacy for their son, who I believe is 8, a young boy. But she said something interesting in her post, the way that she worded it, basically alluding to the fact that there had been concerns about something. Is it likely that the prosecution would call somebody like her as a character witness to try to possibly testify about past problems? And would that matter in a case like this?
Typically in a criminal case, that's not allowed. So criminal cases, the judge in a criminal case, when a case goes to trial, usually limits the evidence to the immediate charged crime. So what happened on the date and time of the charged event? They're especially not going to let a prosecutor bring in witnesses to say this person has an alcohol problem and this person has beaten people up in the past. That is just absolutely not permitted in criminal cases unless the defendant opens the door. So if the defendant and his lawyers make the argument, he's a good guy, he doesn't do bad stuff like this, that essentially opens the door and allows a prosecutor to then bring in witnesses to rebut that evidence of good character that the defendant has presented.
Which they would not want. Do you think this will end in a plea deal?
They're not going to go there.
Yeah. We expecting a plea deal here, do you think?
Yes. What I would expect in this case, for a number of reasons, this guy has a very public career, and he's relying on, the public to like him in order to want to watch him on TV. It appears he has a substance abuse or an alcohol issue. Yeah. So what I expect will happen is he's going to get into an inpatient facility. He's going to get treatment. He's going to come out of treatment. They're going to make sure, his legal team, his treatment providers are going to make sure that he's getting, support care after he gets out of the inpatient treatment. And the criminal case, these things take time. There's evidence that the state needs to disclose. There's witnesses that need to, be interviewed by the defense. There's police officers who need to be interviewed by the defense. That will delay things long enough so that he's able to complete substance abuse treatment, get the help that it appears that he does need. And then that will put him in a good position to negotiate with the prosecutor for what I suspect will be a misdemeanor. I don't think the state has a strong case for a felony. I think extreme pain, because it's so subjective, could they get a conviction on that charge? Maybe. But maybe not. And prosecutors like to go to trial with evidence that's much more certain than something that's merely extreme pain. So I do expect that a deal will be worked out. I expect that the felony count will eventually be dismissed. He'll plead guilty to some kind of misdemeanor, and there will be a lot of community service and a lot of mea culpas in his future where he can make up for his misbehavior in this case.
Yeah, likely not jail, prison time here.
I doubt there'll be prison time. There's a possibility of maybe some jail time. Mm-hmm. But assuming he doesn't have any prior criminal history and he's taken the steps which I've suggested, which would, reassure a court and a prosecutor that something like this isn't going to happen again. I think he could get out of this without having to do any jail time.
Yeah, interesting. Russ Richelsoff, thank you so much for joining us. I always appreciate your analysis on cases and kind of breaking it down for those of us who don't know the legal jargon. So I appreciate everything, and I'm sure this is one we'll be following, and we hope to have you back on the show again soon.
Oh, certainly. Thanks, Briana.
Right. Thanks, Russ. Have a good night. All right, thanks, everybody. We have got one more segment for you. You guys know I love watching my docuseries, documentaries, and we're talking about a new one on Netflix. So stick around. We're talking the BTK Killer after this last break. We'll see you on the other side. All right, our final segment tonight, the Now Playing segment, one of my favorite ones that we do on this show because I am crazy and consume so many documentaries and docuseries on every streaming platform the second they come out. And that would include this one, true crime obviously being my top genre of documentaries. We're talking the BTK Killer. But this is from the perspective of his daughter. It's called My Father, the BTK Killer. I just watched it on a flight to New York, and this is a really interesting retelling of the BTK case. I was not alive when this all started, but Dennis Rader was identified later as the BTK killer. And at the time, he had murdered at least 10 people in the Wichita, Kansas area from the 1970s to the early 1990s. But what made this case so interesting was hearing about all of the letters that he would send the Wichita Eagle newspaper and KAKE TV when these murders first started. He wanted attention. He wanted to kind of, get people riled up about what he was doing, but didn't necessarily want to be caught off the bat. He just wanted people to know that he was watching news coverage of these murders and he knew what the killer would only know, which then, of course, investigators were trying to be able to track these letters down. He was a family guy. That's Dennis Rader on your screen now. He had 2 kids. He was married. He was part of the Wichita, Kansas community. I mean, this was not somebody that people were expecting. And so we later learned that he would name these killings, these victims, as projects, like Project Lights Out or Project Cookie or Project Piano, because it was a pianist that he was targeting. And this went on for a while where he would send these letters to different people, but they couldn't figure out who the BTK killer was. And he named himself Bind, Torture, Kill to stand for BTK. So then the BTK murder seemed to cool off for a while and there wasn't a lot to it and they still didn't know who it was. And then you get to 2004 and they go into this heavily in this documentary. But basically, Dennis Rader was reading a 30-year anniversary piece about the BTK killings and sent another letter to the Wichita Eagle claiming to be behind another murder that they didn't know he had been connected to. Clearly in 2004, he got very bored and then started sending out a slew of different letters, including one to the police that asked if he could send a floppy disk with information. But the way he went about this was to have the police actually run an ad in the local newspaper stating it would be okay for him to do so. So the police department obliged. They ran this ad within the newspaper and said it was okay. And here you go. They got this floppy disk with information. The problem that Dennis Rader didn't consider was that when he was first sending letters in the 70s, that was the 70s. But by this time now, we're in 2004, heading into 2005, technology had come a long way. He did not consider that they would be able to track the metadata that was on that floppy disk. And so that metadata showed there was a deleted document from the Christ Lutheran Church, and it was last modified by somebody named Dennis. Okay, well, you go and look at that, and the only Dennis that was associated with the Christ Lutheran Church who would have had access to all of this was Dennis Rader. So authorities kind of zero in on Dennis Rader as being the potential BTK killer. And in order to do that, remember, they had DNA from these crime scenes and these victims, but never had a match as to who that could be. Well, they knew that Dennis Rader's daughter, who is the focus of this documentary, had gotten a pap smear at a local medical clinic, and they were able to obtain the DNA from her pap smear and compare it with DNA found under the fingertips of one of the BTK victims. It came back as a familial match, which meant that Carrie Rawson, Dennis Rader's daughter, was an offspring or a sibling or a daughter of whoever the perpetrator was. And that was the last final confirmation that they needed to try and prove that Dennis Rader was the BTK killer. When they got him in for a jailhouse interview, a police interview with detectives, he was not very forthcoming at first until they said they had his DNA. And then he started telling them all about the crimes that he committed. And ultimately, he ended up pleading guilty to 10 different murders in the Wichita, Kansas area and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences. My question, and I didn't know this, I had to look into it a little bit, was how was the BTK killer not sentenced to death? Here we are talking about a mass murderer here in Arizona that's going to be executed tomorrow from the 90s, and yet Dennis Rader still sits in a prison cell after these crimes. Well, turns out that at the time of his murders, capital punishment was banned in Kansas. And so when somebody is prosecuted for crimes that they committed, the laws go back into effect that were at the time of those murders. So we've even seen that here in Arizona too, when we were talking about the zombie hunter and the Phoenix Canal killings. Those happened in the early 90s. So the laws that were at play then, which in that case became the threshold for insanity, went back to what it was in the 90s. And that was the same thing with Dennis Rader. Now you were going back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, even though he was caught in 2005. But all that while, he was a dad. And I really, really liked how this documentary followed his daughter, who ended up confronting her dad after more than 2 decades after he was convicted and sentenced as the BTK killer. And it kind of goes through this wrestling of her own personal feelings and revelations as to how she can even process the fact that she knew her dad as dad, but knows he is the BTK killer and what he was capable of on the other side of things. And I thought they did a really nice job kind of capturing her personal journey from when she learned this, when she was in her 20s, to then now and where she is today. And she does a lot of true crime advocacy kind of in the industry now as well, based on being thrust into this spotlight and this role that she obviously never asked for. So My Father, the BTK Killer, out on Netflix now. Highly recommend it. It is well done. You guys know I love my docuseries and documentaries. This is a must watch for people who are fascinated by the way that these crimes have unfolded and how DNA has found some of the most prolific serial killers in the United States. Appreciate everybody joining us. Thanks again for those who had that little technical issue on the YouTube front. We're happy that you were able to come back on. Again, an execution set for tomorrow here in Arizona. Richard Djerf, I'm going to be witnessing it. I am going to be out of town for our show next week, so I'm going to leave you guys with an account of how this execution actually went to play as our True Crime AZ Live show next week, before I leave to head out to Cal Poly, where I went to college, to speak at a media festival about how to become a true crime reporter. So still kind of doing work. Hey, Jason, thanks. Jason's back here. I didn't know he had this up. For those of you guys that might know, we went to New York this past week to celebrate the National Murrows Gala. We won for Best Large Market Television Documentary for our documentary on the spy killer investigation last year. That's Sergio and Shane, who are behind all of the photography and everything that I do. This is so nice. Thank you, Jason. We had the best time in New York celebrating, and it was just really nice to meet some of the best journalists in the business. And that documentary, we are still working on investigations behind the scenes and preparing to debut our next documentary next month, which we're so excited to bring you guys. We're going to be doing a lot of special things on this show and premiering it on YouTube as well, in our streaming, Roku, all of that. So thank you. That was nice. Thanks, Jason. We had a great time, and it's awesome to be working in the true crime industry with a lot of people who are just as passionate about it as me. So stay tuned tomorrow, you guys. We're going to have lives. We're going to have everything from the execution. I'll let you guys know how it goes. I'm hoping for the best. Obviously not the most settling thing to witness, but I think it's important that we have this ability to witness the process so that we can report to you and be transparent about how it works here in Arizona. So I'll see you guys tomorrow if you're following the execution. I'll see you guys next week with everything. Thanks for watching True Crime AZ Live tonight. We'll see you again soon.